Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in, and you can always read my work on ESPN.com. Have a story up now on every draft pick, the analysis of every draft pick. So you want to find out about these guys, I've talked about them, but now you can go read about them, my thoughts on there, but also other people's thoughts as well. So in a few minutes, I'll be joined by Sam Fortier from the Washington Post as we go over the draft class and just some of the things we learned over the weekend and the hard part about analyzing quarterbacks, which I think we all know why it's so hard, but did they get this one right? Well, they better get it right because it can really transform this organization, but it's very difficult. So we'll talk about quarterback, but also a lot of the other draft picks, some of the thoughts from Sam about what he liked or what he learned this weekend, just covering the Commanders draft and some things he saw behind the scenes with Jane Daniels in Detroit, because Sam was in Detroit covering it there for the Washington Post. So we got that. And then a couple things on Tuesday night, Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders, and I will do a live stream show. This time it's going to be early, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. I think Bram and I are probably still a little bit worn out from the draft. We're going to do it early this week. So for those of you who can join early, that'd be great. It'll be up, right afterwards, but 5:30 Eastern time, live stream show. Look for it then. I'm not going to do another show after this until that show. So just as an FYI, also the undrafted free agent class they're going to release it on Monday. I know a lot of names are out there already. I know Sam Hartman received a good bonus, $20,000 and a $225,000 base guarantee. What that basically means is he'll be around this year, and Jake Fromm and Driscoll would not be. So they're not going to keep four quarterbacks on the roster. So you'd have Daniels and Mariota, and then Hartman would be the guy that they would hope to try and develop the way it stands now. Would hope to try and develop on, somehow, one way or another. But anyways, I wouldn't read too much into that. Other teams give guys similar bonuses. It was definitely a high one. He would be a priority free agent for them. It's about, he was projected in the 7th round, priority free agent. So that's what he is. And he did a nice job at Wake Forest, some up and downs at Notre Dame. I didn't think he was quite the quarterback I thought he might be when he got there, but he's still worth bringing in, and he'd be their guy. Just, instead of the Jake Fromms, you get the Sam Hartmans. Anyways, but all those names will be released on Monday, so look for that there. I'll put it up on Twitter, etc. And then we go from there. I got nothing else today, folks. Again, Tuesday, 5:30 Eastern time with Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders, 5:30. Check it out. Bring your questions, bring whatever concerns. We'll talk about everything. We'll talk about the O-line and just, did they do enough this offseason? Not just the draft, the offseason. Anyway, here's my conversation with Sam Fortier from the Washington Post. So I took away from Sam one of his favorite things, which is to do my intro or listen to my intro as he comes on. But I've already recorded it, Sam, so I apologize. So we're starting here. I appreciate you.
I'm doing this podcast under protest, Keim.
Hey, shout out Miss Fortier. Let's get that out of the way. So it may be under protest, but your mom's still going to tune in. So I appreciate that. Listen, we wrapped up 3 days of the draft here. You've had some interesting stories over the last, you were up in Detroit with Jane Daniels. You spent a couple of weeks working on the story with JT O'Sullivan, Chase Daniel, all those guys, right? And that was interesting. So people didn't read it. It's all about how quarterback evaluation on YouTube is really advanced. And it's really educational. And yet the evaluation of quarterbacks remains the hardest thing, period. Anyway, that's about WashingtonPost.com. In general, Sam, your take on the Commanders draft.
To me, it was really an encapsulation of Adam Peters' entire philosophy. He didn't try to fix everything. And most importantly, he was given the support not to try. Right. And by that, I mean, I think it's really notable that for the first time in, for especially with what's gone on for the last 25 years, this team forewent winning off the field so that one day soon they might be able to win on the field.
And it's always funny because it's always, in 24 or 25 years, it's been since whatever. I mean, we all know what that means, of course, but it is true. And, when did you, Was there any surprise to you in that? Because not to me, based on how they are, but I was surprised. Was there any surprise at all in the way they approached it?
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised that this is the way that this ownership group, this front office kind of went about things, but it's a lot easier to say that than it is to actually put it into practice, to have the restraint and the discipline to approach free agency the way they did, to look at their draft board when Johnny Newton is falling to them and say, hey, this is clearly the best guy on our board. We should take him, even though, we now have 5 defensive tackles we're going to have to get snaps for. But that guy was so good, they felt like that was the move they needed to make. And I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt right now because they have not played a snap.
Right.
Their decisions have made sense. It seems like they have the right people in place. But I do think, if Jaden Daniels takes a lot of sacks as he did in college, which we all know, I think that people will start to question, hey, why were more resources not devoted to this offensive line? And right now, I'm willing to say, hey, look, you made a lot of great additions on the interior for sure, but offensive tackle remains a huge question mark. If the season started tomorrow, Brandon Coleman or Cornelius Lucas would be at left. Andrew Wiley would likely be at right. And people can say, oh, well, they still have a ton of time. They still have all the way until late July before training camp starts to make additions. And I would say, yeah, that's true. But it's an aberration if you get a guy that really is a contributor and a starter. I went back and looked actually during the Ron Rivera era. It happened one time, 2021, when they had Leno and Bobby McCain. In San Francisco with Adam Peters, it really only happened twice where they got contributors, not even like solid starters. It was 2017, 2018, the first 2 years of that rebuild. It was an offensive lineman and a defensive player. Each year they got, guys there. But it wasn't like, they found a starting left guard, I believe it was, in 2017. But it's going to be an aberration if they go out and say, hey, we're going to sign Mekhi Becton or Donovan Smith or one of these guys to be a starting tackle. So this is a long-winded way to say I was surprised at how much they stuck to it, taking guys that were elite athletes with high upside late in the draft, obviously with undrafted free agents as well. But I do think there are some legitimate questions remaining about how they handle this.
Well, yes, as tackle. And it's funny because people asked me about the O-line. They did address a lot on the O-line this offseason with the interior, especially. But we all know when people say O-line, you're talking tackles. But I'm not even pushing back on it. I'm clarifying because what you're talking about is tackle. And I would agree with that. That's where, there was such a big run on tackles in that first round. And my understanding is they clearly wanted to trade. They tried to trade back in there. Teams didn't want to move down that far. And therefore it left them in a position where now you've just got to take the best guy. But the question still remains there.
When I say I'm surprised, or when I say, hey, there's restraint here, that's what I'm talking about, because 5 tackles went in the first 18 picks. Jordan Morgan went to Green Bay at 25, and Tyler Guyton went to Dallas at 29. And when you see that run happening and you say, whoever their guy was in that mixture, if you say, okay, we can't go up to 18 to get Amari Mims, the Georgia kid, who I believe went to Cincinnati. When you say,
they
hey,
liked him too.
Right. Like we're going to stay where we are. We are not going to mortgage the future. I think that's a really important part of what we're talking about, because I think the most important part of this season, right, is the development and the growth and the cohesion of their rookie class. And so if they show a lot of promise, Adam Peters can say, okay, I can go out and make splash signings. I can make aggressive trades. And if they're not, he can, kind of reconfigure it that way. But you still have your full complement of 2025 picks. You have a boatload of cap space. I think they're building it the right way, it seems to me right now.
Well, and also, with Coleman's an interesting guy because listed as tackle or a guard. I did talk to one offensive line coach elsewhere who felt like he could play tackle, that is athletic enough, but we've got to see it. So we don't know. And I know Lucas can be a stopgap solution there, but you still want the long-term solution. The other part of that that we don't know yet is the impact of the coaching end, the play calling, the philosophy of the offense, how that, dropping a guy back 70% of the time, not a great philosophy for a young quarterback. So I think they're going to flip that a little bit. How will that impact everything? But you still, like the number, as you know, like Number one thing you got to do with the young quarterback, protect and surround with talent. And so we'll see with that. And, I don't, and it's funny because I have to go back and look at the draft too, Sam, and say, okay, instead of Newton, who else was there that you would say you like better than him? I'm also a firm believer in the way you build a good team is that by getting really good players. And I think Newton qualifies for sure. And I think Sam still is another guy like that too. But it's still, and I also thought, Sam, I wondered if they had gotten a tackle early, do you then try to get another tackle a little bit later to groom for the right side? But didn't get that done. Overall, like what other parts of the class that jumped out to you besides that?
To put a finer point on it,
okay,
Adam Peters is thinking long-term here. And I saw that particularly in foregoing positional needs instead, and taking talented players, experienced players who are leaders. 7 of the 9 picks were team captains, 2 different services, NFL Next Gen Stats and Relative Athletic Score graded the Commanders as the most athletic draft class as a whole. And the guy that created Relative Athletic Score actually tweeted that 2 of the players didn't test for the draft. And if they had, their score would probably be even higher. So to me, when you're building the foundation, like what other parts of the draft class stood out, really it's just like, hey, we are betting on our coaches. We are betting on our development system because we're going to take good athletes. I think the safety from Washington is a great example. Dominique Hampton, because he is a guy who has, elite testing numbers. He can play linebacker, maybe in some packages. He has experience at corner. He's experienced at safety. And even though, he might just be a core special teamer to start, you're thinking, hey, in 2 to 3 years, can this guy be a solid rotational piece? And he's a really good athlete. And I think that, they're going to try to obviously make him a contributor. You could say the same thing about the edge rusher. To me, the parts of the draft class that stand out are them having a clear vision early and taking high upside swings late.
Right. And I like Hampton a lot. I think he could be a guy that you could develop into that in the box safety in a year or two. Can he get to that point? And then to what level does he get to? But I'm with you on that. There also was the theme was violent, physical team leaders.
I think you saw that really in the Michigan corner. When you watch his tape, even though he's really small, he's much smaller compared to, and I know that the big corner that Dan Quinn has the reputation for targeting is more outside. But even still, like their nickels, the Buffalo nickel, which I believe the term they use as well, like the big nickel is still something that Dan Quinn has done. And so for them to go get a smaller guy, I think that really stood out to me. And Adam Peters praised his ball skills. He had 6 picks. He had 6 picks last year. 2 of them were returned for touchdowns. And one other thing that I thought was interesting, this is kind of a random aside, but Sam Fortier and Luke McCaffrey are guys who have a lot of college experience, 1,700 plus snaps. But a lot of that experience, a fair amount of that experience, was at different positions. Obviously, Sam was still a former receiver, McCaffrey a former quarterback. So they're getting guys who are experienced, well-developed, well-rounded football players.
Yeah, and it's funny because the big nickel too, that's a role that Hampton can fill as well, because you can go to that big package and if he can go cover a tight ends, that would be a big W for this team. And we don't know, but I think that's a role that he could carve out as well. So that's something for him. What else? Is there anything like with Newton, what did you take from that? Obviously best player available, but what did you take from that one?
If they use, not just 4 down linemen, if they go multiple fronts, if they go, like a 3-4 or something like that, I think that, having those 3 defensive tackles, John Allen, Daron Payne, and Newton, I think that's a lot of quickness, especially if you get Allen and Payne to rebound. I think that Newton really fits in well, something like that. I think that, he was a guy that multiple scouts at least told me that they think they could see him as a starting 3 technique in this league, right away. Even though he's a little bit undersized, he's creative, he's crafty, he's smart. One of the things that stood out to me when we talked to him was him talking about his IQ and how much film he watches. Yeah. And he was really confident in himself, which I thought was really fun. But he's going to understand down and distance. He's going to be able to know, hey, these are the things I can do. These are the things I can't do in certain down and distances. And so, I mean, I love Newton, and at some point I want to talk about Sinop, but I'll yield my time.
Oh no, and I like Newton a lot too. I think you can't have enough good linemen, and the way Peters built in San Francisco, the way Quinn likes to use guys, they want to make sure you have not just depth but really good depth. And now you have 3 guys where there's 5, like you said, but Fedarian has not shown he can be a pass rusher, and Ridgeway is he's your guy who's going to eat up the nose and all that. The same with Fedarian. They're both bigger guys. So this gives you another guy who can pressure the passer, and with Allen and Payne. Sanat is another really good one too. And I've heard a lot of good things about him, and, after the catch, very good. Just, can block in the physical play. And you saw what Peter said about it, comparing him to Juszczyk and then Kittle, as far as the ability that he has, not so much, that he's going to be the same level, but just things that he can do. So what do you want to say about him?
During the NFL playoffs, like the Post covers like different teams, random things. And I spent a couple weeks actually in San Francisco, and one of the stories that I wrote was about Juszczyk, because the fullback is an endangered species. There's very, very few of them, like true fullbacks, especially.
Right.
And you could argue that Kyle Juszczyk is really a tight end that they line up in the backfield. But just so I ended up watching a lot of Kyle Juszczyk tape, and I wrote a story about it. But basically, watching Kyle Juszczyk bounce between the slot, inline, backfield, the way he blocks, the way he cleans things up, the way that he understands the game. For Adam Peters, who obviously was very familiar with Kyle Juszczyk, having signed him, being a part of the front office that signed him in 2017 when San Francisco was rebuilding, for him to throw out Juszczyk as a potential comparison, and then if you go watch the Sanat tape, the amount that he bounces between the slot, inline, and backfield, if he could be anything close to Juszczyk, who is, it's probably not as impressive to be an all-pro as a fullback, because there's not that many dudes in the league. But I mean, a really good football player, like if he can be that guy for you, if he can be a Swiss Army knife that you can move all over to create matchups and clean things up, that would be such a massive piece for this offense. And I think that when I hear those comparisons, my mind just, and this is not a fault of Adam Peters or Sanat, my mind just flashes to Ron Rivera talking about Antonio Gibson as Christian McCaffrey. and it's like, that's not the same situation, but I can't help but think, here's an optimistic guy at the start of his rebuild, and he has some lofty visions for this mid-round pick. Antonio was a 3 and Ben Sanat was a 2. So I'm not saying that's exact situations, but if he can be something like that, man, that would be cool.
Well, that would be cool. But and it's funny because Juszczyk changes things for them. And I know there's a lot of playmakers and all that in that offense, but what it also does here is with Zach Ertz, obviously older, has had some injuries the last couple of years, and it gives you another guy who can catch the ball. And you cannot count on Cole Turner. John Bates is a blocker, and Kingsbury wants to use a lot of 12 personnel. I think it was in the last 3 years in Arizona, he was I think it was top 10 in terms of 12 personnel usage. So they needed to get that guy, but it's the versatility that comes with him, not position flex necessarily, but versatility. So, but it is. So, because you need guys like that, and it's really hard to find tight ends who can play out of the backfield effectively. You can line them up back there, but to do it effectively is different.
Kyle Juszczyk, if you were going to replace yourself, how would you do it? And he was like, first off, you're not replacing me. I'm playing until I'm 45 years old. I'm obsessed with that stuff. But he said the only way you would do it, and I think the way that Houston did it and the way that a couple other teams did it, but I'm blanking right now, is they got tight ends who are comfortable being in the backfield. Right. And so this is exactly that sort of guy.
What did you learn being in Detroit, watching Jaden Daniels behind the scenes? What did you learn there?
The most impressive thing to me is how polished he is with the media. And that might be like an inside baseball observation, but like, look, man, I was at the red carpet. Well, actually, let me start. On Wednesday, you get there, and he's at like a charity event or a Special Olympics football camp that they did. And afterwards, we talked to Jaden Daniels for about 30 minutes. And he was there, and it was cold, and he was like, kind of chilly. But I mean, people asked, including me, we asked about Topgolf, and we asked about the rumors that he wanted to play for the Raiders, and we asked about, all of the things that have been swirling, his agent's activity on social media. And there were some like really awkward, random like questions that got thrown his way. Somebody was like, is it true that you don't like mambo sauce? And he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never even heard of mambo sauce. Um, and he handled it really well. And then the next day, he had, about 30 minutes on the red carpet where he was talking to different media. And then afterward, I mean, look, like when the NFL, like when you get drafted, I did not realize this because I've never been to the draft before. But after you get drafted, you go through a car wash of like NFL business partners, and you do like 3 minutes with, Hyde or whatever, and you do 4 minutes with this other brand X and brand Y, and then he came upstairs to kind of the media room and he did a press conference for about 5 minutes, and then he did, I want to say it was something like 30 hits with like different local TV stations, podcasts, just, like the CBS affiliate and blah, blah, blah. And I went last. And I just kind of stood there and watched him. And I think everybody asked him the same questions. What did you think? When did you realize this? Some about the Top Golf, some about blah, blah, blah. And Jaden never seemed frustrated. He never seemed upset. He was like personable and like he's kind of a relatively reserved guy, but he was affable, and he answered pretty much the same way every time. Oh, I'm just blessed to be going where I'm going. I'm really excited, blah, blah, blah. The things that you heard and I have heard even in his first press conference in Washington. And so those things are impressive to me. But I don't think that means he will succeed or fail as a quarterback.
Right. I think that just speaks to some maturity too, but you don't know it. You still got to go do it on the field. But it is what I've heard about him is how, the coaches who have had him, people who have worked with him would talk about like maybe being a little bit unflappable and that he's always got a smile on his face. He makes touchdown, smile on his face, interception, smile, not because he's happy through an interception, because like, hey, I'm going to get it next time. Don't worry. I got it. So, it just seems like that's kind of his nature. Also, what did you learn too, just in that story? You talked to JT O'Sullivan, quarterback school, Chase Daniel, a few other guys. What did you learn just in the evaluation process and why it's so hard to get quarterbacks right?
So I think everybody understands that quarterback isn't an exact science, and it's been that way forever, even though teams have devoted hours and hours and theoretically like millions and millions of dollars to it. But the thing that was hard for me to understand is, okay, why is it still that way? Even though I feel like in the 4 years I've been covering the team, I have a much better understanding of the minutia of NFL quarterback play, because these guys like JT O'Sullivan, Chase Daniel, and others. And so I went to Coronado, an island across the bay from San Diego, and spent some time with JT O'Sullivan. And basically, he kind of showed me his home office setup where he does a lot of these videos. And he was like, look, man, like just no one knows. And so the way that he does things is he says, I am going to grade the film. I am just going to look at what they did. And I'm the GM's job, which is why he gets paid a ton of money, but he also could get fired, is he has to project. And so Drake May was a great example this year, right? With the footwork and, what can he be? What's his ceiling? And he was like, from the tape that I saw, Jaden Daniels was clearly the second best player in college football this year, but does he have the best ceiling? What's his durability? Blah, blah, blah. I don't know that. I'm not focused on that. But I think, YouTube for so many industries, for so many different things, it'll teach you how to change the oil on your car, or, it'll show me like my favorite movie scenes before bed or whatever. Like it's really just revolutionized, I think, deepened the fans' understanding of the game. And I think that maybe the most notable example of that is JT was really high on Justin Fields, super high. Like he thought he was a better prospect in the draft than Trevor Lawrence. And one of the reasons that he has changed his methodology to say, hey, I'm just focusing on the tape, is because of an experience like that. And so when he went through and said, why is Justin struggling? He was able to do hour-long breakdowns with fans to kind of explain to them, this is why. And some of it's on Justin, some of it's on their offensive system, their coaching staff, blah, blah, blah. But I just think that like it's fascinating to me. We know more about quarterbacks than ever, and we are no closer predicting who's going to succeed in the NFL.
And also, you also had this was kind of impressive that you, in a quarterback story, you also talks about pancreatic cancer and how there's been advances there, but is there any closer to doing that? Just the point is like, there's a lot more information of stuff out there, but you never know. And it's so hard. But also I think the hard part with quarterbacks, and this is where Washington has to succeed. You got the guy that you like, and you got the guy that, a lot of people not unanimous that people I talked to but it was pretty overwhelming in favor of him. Now you got to make it work. And so now you got to surround him. So that's the other hard part of the quarterback. There's so much that goes into it, that from, the scheme you use to the protection, like we talked about, the line or style of play, or, or just one injury can change it, as we've seen with other guys. So that's the hard part too.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. When I talked to Daniel Jeremiah on one of his conference calls, and I talked to an analytics guy whose name is actually escaping me. I feel terrible about that. But basically, both those guys said, even though quarterbacks are harder to predict than ever, the league is getting better because about quarterbacks. And Daniel Jeremiah said, hey, it's all about the supporting cast now. You're hearing less about what is this quarterback's traits, and you're hearing more about what's the environment we're putting him into, as you and I have talked about. And the analytics guy, who writes the Unexpected Points newsletter. I feel like I got to plug him that way if I can't remember his name.
And I can remember part of his quote too.
Kevin Cole. Kevin Cole's his name. He
Yes.
used to work at PFF. Super smart dude. He said that he thinks the league is getting much smarter about quarterbacks because after 2011, when the CBA changed and you got the rookie wage scale, teams are smarter about taking a ton of shots on quarterbacks. Even if they have smaller resumes, even if they are from smaller schools, and like even though Zach Wilson and some of and Trey Lance have not necessarily hit, he was like, it's smart to just keep taking shots on that position, because if you hit one, if you get Josh Allen as an example of a guy who's hit on that, like then you have the most valuable thing in sports, and you have him for the next, you're out of the quarterback market for the next 10 to 15 years. And so, and also they're moving off of them quicker. If Zach Wilson isn't succeeding, you say, okay, screw that. We got to go get Aaron Rodgers, or we got to go get someone else. We can't give him 3 years to prove that he's not the guy. And so I think both of those things, even though quarterbacks are harder, are still impossible to evaluate, the league is doing a better job adjusting to that uncertainty.
And I think San Francisco is a great example of, now they didn't go get Purdy because they weren't sold on, I don't know what, but you wanted to get another young guy in there, much like they signed Sam Hartman to as a PF prior to free agent. So, and I'll be honest, like, I hope Sam doesn't get jealous of some of us. He gets a lot of credit for his looks. I just hope I'm just putting it out there. I don't want him to get jealous. So I'm gonna dress it down a little bit this year, but so that's another side.
I've often thought John Keim's hair, he has the luscious locks that Sam Hartman wishes he had.
I wasn't going to say it, so we'll just move on. All right. I don't want to get the guy bent out of shape before he gets here. But to that point, like, they were aggressive for Trey Lance, and then you get another young guy you develop, because you keep going back to it. Even if you think you have a guy, you're still going back to it. Ron Wolf, the great Hall of Fame GM for the Packers, was always go get one. If you can get one every year, get one, because it's so hard and so important to fill that spot that you always, and if the guy pans out and you got a guy, you can always trade him. So
what do you think Ron Wolf would think of paying a quarterback $100 million guaranteed and then drafting his successor with the 8th pick?
That's a bit of a big swing that maybe not even Mr. Wolf would have taken with the 8th pick. And it's funny because I understand what they're doing, right? Like, you understand that they want a line of succession here, but there's also part of me that in those videos with Terry Fontenot and Arthur Blanks, I don't know if he's reminding him, like, dude, like, I'm not 60 years old. So let's, whatever. But with this team, where do you feel, last thing then, where do you feel they're at with their, we're at now at another line of whatever for the offseason, line of demarcation, whatever it is. Where do you think they're at now compared to where they were 3 months ago? How much different is this, or better?
Well, it's very different. I think the floor is much higher. I would say that the ceiling is still relatively limited. And I say that because if you're into sports gambling, which I am not, but a lot of people are nowadays, but I out of curiosity, I checked this morning what the projected win total in Vegas is. And most sportsbook have them at 6.5 wins, which is tied for the 4th lowest with teams like Las Vegas, Tennessee, the New York Giants. And to me, like, that's a pretty accurate, like I would say, I would probably, if you said today, Sam, what do you think how many games do you think they're going to win? I'd probably say something like 7, but it's different in the sense that, like, the most important thing this season is Jaden Daniels' development and the cohesion of the rookie class around him. And, I think next offseason, when Adam Peters, if all goes well, next offseason, Adam Peters will have still a lot of assets at his disposal, and he'll push more of his chips into the middle of the table. But when you say, like, where are they at right now? I'm optimistic. They're trending upward.
Right,
I think they're building it in a smart, sustainable way. But I'm not ready to say they're going to make the playoffs.
Well, you can't, and we can't go there without having seen this kid play. I mean, you know what I mean? Like there's so many questions. Like there's a lot of stuff that I've liked that they've done, but there's been stuff what I like mostly is in the general sense is the structure of the organization and the decision-making process and the people you have making decisions. That to me is bigger than everything they've done on the field, having that cohesion or that group. You don't have, Dan Snyder who didn't know anything, right? Or thought he did, but you know what I mean? Like that's where I think the hope lies in that triumvirate. And then you get to the field, you got to make it work. But that's why I think they have some hope, because if you get the right people, you get the right people on the field, then you can go. But it starts with when we start seeing like, what can Jaden Daniels do? Then we'll get a better idea what, in terms of win totals and all that. But to me, it's just like you said, it's all, his growth. Does he look like he can be the guy? And do they look like they drafted some of the right players? Does, Louvu look like the guy I think he is, who can rush the passer? And like Sam still too, like that dude can blitz off the edge too. Like they've got guys who can now blitz and do some things that can add to that defense that are a little bit, understated at this point. So, but yes, I'm with you on that. I think there's reasons for optimism for sure. When they get there, who the heck knows? It starts with that kid being the right guy.
Absolutely. And one like nerdy football thing that you were just mentioning, there are a lot of guys I think that can blitz off the edge. And I think that I'm very curious, because if you don't have stud edge rushers, I wonder, like obviously, Dan Quinn had in Dallas, like what is their blitz rate going to be? Obviously, like Brian Flores last year in Minnesota was setting records for blitz rates, but I wonder like how often and Dan Quinn, was not that close, but he was still up there last year in terms of blitz rate. I wonder how aggressive this defense is going to be, particularly because the last 4 years we saw them say, okay, we have a great defensive line. We don't really need to blitz that much. So I'm very curious at what this defense is going to look like, but that is a totally niche 30 seconds that we just spent on that thing, which I'm sure people don't care that much about right now.
Oh, but they will. And the other thing is, can the corners hold up? That's the other big question that we didn't even get to, because can these outside corners hold up with this press style, et cetera? And that's why you're going to try and bring some more pressure to, force some mistakes, right? But they did add guys who have, like, again, Louvu, Sam still, I think those guys can rush from different areas and at least create more opportunities for the coaches or create a more versatile defense in terms of pressuring the passer. So I think that's where it's going to be a big improvement. But again, let's see on the field, because everybody listening to this is here like, well, I've heard this before about other teams. That's why I point to the power structure at the top as being your primary reason for or should be, but even there, Sam, like we still don't know. I mean, but it's just it's a better setup than they've had, but I don't know.
You never know. And I think that's the thing going through this cycle. So Ron Rivera was the first, and I mean, I covered the Chargers for 1 year, but I covered the whole cycle of Ron Rivera, right? And so I was just like, when Dan Quinn comes in and he puts up anyone, anytime, anywhere in the meeting room, like it's a nice saying, but like, is that incredibly different than like, don't draw me a map unless you've been there, or be where your feet are, or attitude, preparation, effort? No, like they got to win. And like, that's the whole thing. But there is optimism now.
Sayings are great, and it's for eternal. Not everybody buys into that. It's still about what you like. It's still about the staff you provide around them. It's still about, all those other things. And then the sayings can be like, okay, you can put them on your head, you can do whatever, but it's still about the actions in the meeting rooms. It's about the guys coming in early, staying late, whatever. That's how it's going to get done. So, but yeah, the sayings are fun and they're nice, but we're going to hear the same things. We're going to say, some different things, but it's got to be like, you're going to prove it in other ways, not just on the wall. So, and I think they know that. I would hope so. So you got any final thoughts, Sam?
Man, I would say one final thought is, it was promising to me that the team obviously did not care about public perception in terms of drafting another offensive lineman, that they stuck to their process, that they weren't swayed. And I think that's the sort of patience. And I know we've covered that, we covered that earlier, but I just think that focusing less on what you and I say on this podcast is probably good for the organization, and will help moving forward.
I do not think they are focused on the public perception at all. And I think that's a welcome change because for too long, if you're making decisions based on that, it's just going to it'd be hard. Focus on what you feel is best. And maybe sometimes the public's going to be right, but you got to focus on your process and how you get to your results more than anything else. So, anyways, and I include ourselves when I say public. So it's not just fans, it's media, fans, whatever.
Totally, yes.
They don't pay attention to the noise. And that's why even with all the Top Golf stuff, it never caused them an ounce of concern because they knew behind the scenes what was going on. So anyway, Sam, thanks a lot for coming on. Tell people where they can find you.
You can find me on X/Twitter at SAM4TR, SAM4TR. In the Washington Post, WashingtonPost.com. And I feel like I plugged like 3 or 4 stories that I've written. So I hopefully you can go read one of those. Yeah.
There you go. Thanks, Sam.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Keim.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Sam for joining me. And thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Tuesday night, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, live stream show with Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders. Talk to you next time.